Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. The Finance Minister has announced the second part of the relief measures under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. While the first part of the relief measures were focused entirely on the MSME sector, the second part of the relief measures are focused on migrant workers, labourers, street vendors, small businesses and as well as farmers. There are quite a few articles in today's newspaper that cover this important development, including an article on page number 1 and another related article on page number 8. So first let us summarize these relief measures that were announced by the Finance Minister. The Finance Minister has announced an additional free supply of food grains for the next 2 months for migrant workers under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. Along with this, the government has made a commitment to implement the One Nation, One Ration Card scheme that provides for portability of the PDS system, and it has been planned to achieve 100% coverage by March 2021. Then the Finance Minister has announced affordable rental housing complexes for migrant workers and the poor population in urban areas. And along with this, a special credit facility of 5,000 crore rupees has been announced for street vendors. Then under the Mudra scheme, interest subvention of 2% has been announced in order to support small businesses. Then through the compensatory afforestation fund, 6,000 crore rupees is going to be used in order to create employment opportunities for the Adivasis and tribal communities. Then for farmers, concessional credit of around 2 lakh crore rupees is being extended under the PM Kisan scheme, which is expected to benefit around 2.5 crore farmers. Then through NABARD, another 30,000 crore rupees is being introduced in order to provide for emergency working capital for farmers. Plus the centre has also included the funds that it had earlier released to state disaster response funds in order to set up shelters for migrant workers. It has also included the employment opportunities generated under Manrega, and finally the housing subsidy provided to middle income families has been extended until March 2021. So this is a summary of some of the key relief measures that were announced by the Finance Minister as a part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, and they have been designed to primarily benefit migrant workers, labourers, street vendors and small businesses, and as well as farmers. So now let us take a more detailed look at some of these measures that have been announced by the Finance Minister. See, one of the biggest crises created by the lockdown was that crores of migrant workers across the country were not able to access even basic food supplies. Because due to sudden loss of employment, they were not in a position to even afford basic food supplies. So in order to help out these migrant workers during the first phase of the lockdown, the government had announced the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. Under this scheme, a provision of free food grains was made for migrant workers, but unfortunately, this provision was restricted only to beneficiaries who were covered under the National Food Security Act. So this benefit was applicable only to those covered under the PDS system and only to those who possessed ration cards. So when this scheme was announced, the government was criticized for not providing for universal coverage or 100% coverage. Because there are crores of people in our country who are eligible for receiving benefits under the National Food Security Act, but they do not possess a ration card. According to various economists, this number stands at more than 10 crore people. Studies have shown that at least more than 10 crore people who are otherwise eligible for benefits under the National Food Security Act, they do not possess ration cards, and as a result, they are not able to receive the benefits of this scheme. So in order to plug this gap, the Government of India has decided to extend the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana in order to provide for free supply of food grains to migrant workers for the next 2 months. And this time, the government has extended the benefits to around 8 crore migrant families which do not possess a ration card. That is, these families are not covered under the National Food Security Act. So through this relief measure, the government plans to provide 5 kilograms of food grains, that is either rice or wheat, per person, and 1 kilogram of pulses per family per month for the next 2 months. This relief measure is expected to cost the government around 3,500 crore rupees, and the entire cost would be borne by the central government. The state governments would only be responsible for implementing this scheme, for identifying the migrants, and for distributing the food grains. But however, economic experts have pointed out that there are a couple of drawbacks to this relief measure. One, this provision comes a little too late and it has been delayed by at least a month because that's when the food crisis faced by migrant workers was at its peak. And second, this relief measure is not universal even now. Even though the relief measure plans to cover around 8 crore migrant workers without ration cards, it still leaves out a number of people who are not covered under the PDS system. That's the reason why economic experts have been urging the government to provide for universal coverage or 100% coverage of the PDS scheme in order to ensure food security during these tough times. Next, migrant workers have been forced to vacate their rented accommodation, especially in urban areas, because they are no longer in a position to afford the rent. So in order to ensure their housing security, the Government of India has decided to provide for affordable rental housing complexes under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Under this pre-existing housing scheme of the Government of India, a dedicated program would be launched to provide affordable rental housing complexes for migrant workers, laborers and the poor population in the urban areas. The objective under the scheme is to convert existing government-funded housing complexes in urban areas into affordable renting housing complexes for the migrant workers. This project would be executed through the public-private partnership mode, and hence the Government of India has called upon private industries, private manufacturing units and institutions to develop these affordable rental housing complexes on private land with support from the state and the central governments. So in order to execute this plan, the central government is planning to incentivize the private sector and as well as the state governments, and the required guidelines would be issued by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Then over the last 2 months, the government had extended a number of relief measures to migrant workers, and it has chosen to include these relief measures as well under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. And for this, the government has been facing a lot of criticism. Because these are not any new measures that are being announced by the government. Instead, it has chosen to include the previously extended measures under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Over the last couple of months, we have discussed that the centre had transferred around 11,000 crore rupees to the state disaster response funds in order to provide emergency relief to migrant workers. By making use of these funds, state governments were supposed to provide food, shelter, water, face masks, sanitizers, etc. So these relief measures which were extended over the last 2 months have also been brought under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, and since it does not constitute any new relief measure, the government has been criticized for this move. Next, the government has decided to revise a few labour codes in order to benefit workers and labourers. This revision in labour codes provides for the universalization of right of minimum wages and timely payment of wages to all workers, including the unorganized sector. Currently, minimum wages were applicable to only around 30% of the workers in an industry. The government has also introduced the statutory concept of national floor wage in order to reduce regional disparity in minimum wages. This will set a common uniform floor wage across the country and establish it as a legal right. So this will help in removing any state-wise differences in minimum wages. Next, a few provisions have been introduced in order to promote formalization of the work culture and to promote the health and safety of the workers. Then the revision of labour codes provides for the definition of interstate migrant worker. It provides for portability of social security and welfare benefits for migrant workers. It also extends the benefits of employee state insurance across India to cover all districts. Then the revision of labour codes has also introduced a few more social security benefits for the unorganized sector. A reskilling fund is being set up for employees who have lost their jobs as a result of the economic crisis, and the obligation of the employer to provide for gratuity for fixed term employment after an employee completes 5 years of service has been reduced to 1 year of service. Next, coming to farmers, the government has announced a 2 lakh crore concessional credit to 2.5 crore farmers. The farmers who would be eligible for these concessional loans would be the beneficiaries of the PM Kisan scheme, and these loans would be dispersed through Kisan credit cards. But apart from this, the government has not announced any substantial relief measure for the farmers, and it has only listed out the relief measures that have been provided to farmers over the last 2 months. For example, it has included the loan moratorium, which was extended by the RBI. It has included the refinancing of loans, which was provided by NABARD and other cooperative and regional rural banks. It has even included the funding provided to the Rural Infrastructure Development Fund. So these are not necessarily new measures and does not constitute any increased fiscal expenditure for the government. Hence, a lot more is expected out of the government to protect farmers and the rural economy from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, in order to provide relief to street vendors who have been severely affected by the lockdown, the government has extended a 5,000 crore rupees special credit facility. This initiative is expected to be launched within a month, and through this initiative, the government would be providing loans of around 10,000 rupees to each street vendor in order to provide them the working capital in order to restart their business. The government expects this facility to help out at least around 50 lakh street vendors across the country, and the scheme will also introduce around 5,000 crore rupees of liquidity into the market. Then under the scheme itself, the government is looking to promote the percolation of digital payments at the level of street vendors, and it is planning to incentivize those street vendors who make use of digital payments by providing them monetary awards and a higher working capital as a reward for their good behavior. Then to help out small businesses which have been affected by the lockdown, the government has announced an interest subvention of 2% for those who had availed loans under the Mudra Shishu scheme. But overall, the second part of the relief package announced by the government under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is quite disappointing, because the total increase in fiscal expenditure for the government is just 5,000 crore rupees. There are only two measures which account as fiscal expenditure for the government. This includes the 3,500 crore rupees that the centre would be spending on providing free food grains to migrant workers. But this again does not cover all migrant workers because the scheme is not universal, and the relief package comes a little too late. Then the other relief measure for which the government would be incurring a fiscal cost is the interest subvention that has been announced under the Mudra scheme. This accounts for a fiscal outgo of 1,500 crore rupees. So in total, the government is actually spending 5,000 crore rupees in addition. And most of the relief measures that were announced yesterday are essentially repackaged versions of existing schemes and an inclusion of credit facilities that were already being provided by the RBI and the banks. But however, in an article on page number 15, the real estate sector has welcomed a couple of relief measures. This includes the provision of affordable rental housing complexes under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and the subsidy extension that has been provided for housing loans for the middle income group. Industry experts believe that these relief measures will help in kickstarting activities in the construction sector and as well as in other allied sectors that are dependent on real estate projects. Next, we have a related editorial on page number 6, which says that the second part of the relief package is quite disappointing because it is largely made up of credit facilities, liquidity measures, and extension of existing schemes, and it does not contain any substantial fiscal stimulus. See, the provision of easy loans and interest subsidies will only provide working capital to those who are looking to restart their business. But this alone won't help in reviving demand, which is dependent on the purchasing power of the people. Right now, the purchasing power of the lower sections, especially migrant workers, has taken a massive hit due to loss of employment, and hence providing just loans won't bring an end to the economic misery that they are currently going through. Yes, providing easier loans will help in restarting businesses, but it won't put an end to the economic misery of the lower sections, and it won't increase their purchasing power, and hence it won't be sufficient to revive demand, which is very crucial to reviving the economy. So hopefully, the other relief measures that would be announced by the government should consider putting some cash directly into the hands of the lower sections, such as the migrant workers, the unemployed, laborers, farmers, etc., in order to increase their purchasing power. But the editorial does appreciate the government for bringing its focus back on Manrega and for expanding the coverage of PDS by extending the provision of free food grains even to those migrant workers without ration cards. These two measures does bring some meaningful relief to migrant workers, because as a result of this reverse migration, crores of migrant workers have travelled back to their native places and they are currently out of employment. So the central government has to be appreciated for restarting Manrega despite the lockdown and for coordinating with the state governments in order to create job opportunities under Manrega, because this provides meaningful employment and decent wages to the unemployed migrant workers who have returned back to their native places. The expansion of PDS will also help in ensuring food security of at least 8 crore migrant workers. But before providing for 100% coverage of One Nation, One Ration card by March 2021, the centre should consider the concerns that have been expressed by a few state governments. A few state governments are concerned that implementing ration card portability under One Nation, One Ration card would disproportionately increase their burden, and hence the centre needs to address these concerns first before providing for 100% coverage of the scheme. Then finally, in order to ensure complete food security and ensure that no individual is left out of the PDS, the centre needs to start working towards ensuring universal coverage of the National Food Security Act. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, which evaluates the impact of the dilution of labour laws by a few state governments. The writers illustrate how the enforcement of a few special provisions of the Disaster Management Act has led to the dilution of labour laws in India, and they evaluate its impact on the labour class. See, there is no doubt that enforcing a lockdown under the Disaster Management Act had become necessary in order to contain the spread of the pandemic. But the invocation of special laws such as the Disaster Management Act, the Epidemic Diseases Act, etc., has given special and extraordinary powers to the central government and the state governments, and this has ended up diluting the labour laws, which affects the interests of the labour class. See, over the last couple of weeks, we have discussed that a number of state governments, such as Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, etc., they have diluted their labour laws in order to help the industries to restart their activities and help revive the economy. So it appears that the industry has somehow managed to convince the government that the only short way to revive industrial activities in the economy is by relaxing labour laws, which affects the rights and the welfare of the labourers. The writers make a very strong case against the dilution of labour laws, and they say that labour laws are civilizational goals and they cannot be diluted by using the pandemic as an excuse. According to the writers, the immediate impact of the lockdown was first felt by the unorganized workers, such as migrant workers and daily wage earners, but now the impact of the lockdown is also being felt by the organized workers as a result of the dilution of the labour laws. According to the writers, this is an attempt of the industry to return to the system of laissez-faire. See, laissez-faire is a French term which refers to free enterprise. Under this system, industries are allowed to conduct their business on their own terms with absolutely no government interference. So this system, which was prevalent during the colonial times, was what gave birth to the system of indentured labour. Under the indentured labour system, the employers and the employee, they shared a master-slave relationship. This was a system where the labourers did not enjoy any rights and their welfare and safety was left to the discretion of the employer. And the lack of government interference in this system led to the exploitation of the labourers and the working class by the employers and the industry. One example for this would be the 7th Bengal regulations that were introduced in 1819. These regulations were introduced by the colonial government in order to help the private British tea plantation owners to exploit workers and labourers in tea estates. Under these regulations, the labourers were expected to sign a 5-year contract, and they would be punished if they chose to quit before the expiry of the contract period. Then there were other laws such as the Transport of Native Labourers Act of 1863, the Bengal Act 6 of 1865, and all these legislations enabled the industries to exert their control over the labourers and further exploit them with the support of the government. In fact, when the Factories Act was introduced by the colonial government, it promoted 12-hour work shifts, which led to severe exploitation of the working class and the rise of debt slavery. Even after being made to work for 12 hours every day, they would still not be paid basic wages, and the owners were not responsible for ensuring their health and safety. It took a series of protests, strikes, and popular movements across the country in order to change this colonial mindset, and this paved the way for the parliament in post-independent India to legally recognize labour laws, labour welfare, and labour rights. As far as labour welfare is concerned, this shift in colonial mindset started to occur with the introduction of the Government of India Act in 1935. This act introduced more Indian lawmakers who were able to empathize with the cause of the labourers. As a result, a few changes were introduced to the Factories Act and other labour-related laws. Then post-independence, the introduction of directive principles of state policy and fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution paved the way for further labour reforms. Article 43 and Article 43A has placed special obligations on the government to ensure the welfare of the workers, and fundamental rights such as Article 21 and Article 23 guarantees the right to life and right against exploitation. So this change in colonial mindset has made the current labour laws possible, and they guarantee a set of basic rights, welfare, health and safety of the workers, and this has been the result of a hard-won effort against the laissez-faire system. So the writers say that diluting these labour laws by using the pandemic as an excuse marks a return to the laissez-faire system and erodes the civilizational goals that we have managed to achieve. Now let's take up a column from page number 7, which evaluates the threat faced by the marine environment in the Asia-Pacific region. See, the Asia-Pacific region, consisting of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, is home to a very rich biodiversity, and this marine environment sustains millions of livelihoods and a variety of cultures. But of late, the marine environment of the Asia-Pacific region has come under a lot of stress due to the increasing number of environmental threats. The writer points out that climate change and unsustainable resource management are the two biggest threat factors that have placed a lot of environmental stress on the marine environment of the Asia-Pacific region. Under these threat factors, we have factors such as overfishing, excessive marine plastic pollution, overexploitation of marine resources, which have contributed to the degradation of the marine environment in the Asia-Pacific region. The writer cautions that any further degradation could result in environmental breakdown, and it could have a serious impact on the livelihoods of millions of people who reside in the Asia-Pacific region, and as well as on the small economies that are a part of the Asia-Pacific region. See, under the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, we have goal number 14, which deals with life below water. Under SDG 14, there are 14 targets that member countries are supposed to achieve in order to protect our marine environment and the resources that are found below water. According to a recent study conducted by the Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific, which is a UN body, we do not have sufficient data to track the progress of countries towards achieving these 14 targets. According to this study conducted by the UN body, data is available only for 2 out of these 14 targets, and the inability to track the performance of the countries on the other 12 targets could affect our chances of achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which is life below water. The writer points out that the Asia-Pacific region has already emerged as the world's largest producer of fish. This is a direct result of overfishing, and it has had a direct impact on the well-being of marine organisms. And since Asia-Pacific economies are fast-growing economies, they cause a lot of pollution, which directly affects the marine environment of the Asia-Pacific region. According to data provided by the Economic and Social Commission for the Asia-Pacific region, plastic pollution is extremely high because the Asia-Pacific region alone accounts for nearly 50% of the global production of plastic. A large part of this plastic which is produced in this region is consumed within the region as well, and the subsequent plastic pollution caused by it, including microplastics, are drained into the marine environment of the Asia-Pacific, causing severe ecological damage to its biodiversity. Since such a large volume of plastic is produced in the region, it leads to a lot of CO2 emissions, and carbon dioxide being a greenhouse gas, it further drives up climate change and global warming. The excess CO2 that is present in the atmosphere gets absorbed by the oceans, and it further accelerates climate change. Because when carbon dioxide is absorbed by the oceans in large quantities, it results in the formation of carbonic acid, leading to the acidification of oceans. This directly affects the well-being of marine organisms, especially coral reefs, and it also disrupts the natural cycles that are in operation in the marine environment. The writer points out that as a result of climate change and unsustainable resource management, environmental degradation in the Asia-Pacific region has accelerated, and the cost for this is being borne by the smaller states, that is the Pacific Island states. Then upon this, the littoral states of the Asia Pacific region are heavily dependent on the marine economy, and as a result, maritime connectivity has acquired a lot of significance in this region. And excessive reliance on maritime connectivity also increases marine pollution caused by the shipping industry. So all these environmental threat factors are degrading the marine environment of the Asia Pacific, and it is posing a grave threat to millions of lives and livelihoods in the region. According to the writer, if this environmental degradation has to be prevented, and if the marine environment has to be restored, then there is an urgent need for countries present in the Asia Pacific region to cooperate with each other and share environment related data with each other. And this calls for transboundary ocean management, because the fate of all the Asia Pacific countries are tied to a common destiny, and they are together in this challenge. So if they have to overcome this common problem, they need a common solution. And for working out such a common solution, you need transboundary cooperation and transboundary data sharing. One such initiative has already been taken by the Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific region, and it is known as the Ocean Accounts Partnership. Through this platform, the UN body has been promoting the exchange of data, and it has been promoting the member countries to engage in dialogue with each other in order to evolve a common solution. But however, we need to remember that such platforms will only help in working out an international agreement, but it will give results only when it is translated into national action plans by the respective countries. Now let's take up the practice questions. With regard to conservation efforts related to the Indian leopard, which of the following are correct? It is listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. It is listed under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. It is listed under Appendix 1 of CITES. All the three are correct, so option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 5 which makes a reference to the Indian leopard. Now let's take up the next practice question. The proposed Diamer-Bhasha dam has caused a diplomatic dispute involving which three countries? The correct answer is option D. It has caused a diplomatic dispute involving India, Pakistan and China. This question has been asked because we have a couple of articles on page number 8 and page number 14 that makes a reference to the Diamer-Bhasha dam that has been proposed to come up in the Gilgit-Baltistan region, which is under the illegal occupation of Pakistan. Now let's take up the next practice question. What is the primary objective of the National Research Development Corporation? The correct answer is option B. Its primary objective is to promote, develop and commercialize the technologies, patents and processes emanating from various national R&D institutions. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 11, the personal protective equipment that was developed by the Navy is being patented, and this patented technology is being commercialized for licensed production with the help of the National Research Development Corporation. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2017 prelims paper. Which of the following are not necessarily the consequences of the proclamation of President's rule in a state? Dissolution of the State Legislative Assembly, removal of the Council of Ministers in the state, dissolution of the local bodies. Amongst the given statements, statement 1 and 3 are correct, so option B is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, critically examine the relief measures announced for migrant workers under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. The second question, labor laws are civilizational goals and cannot be trumped on the excuse of a pandemic. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.